All right, so let's go ahead and continue with my little experiment here with the TV chapter. Something I've never done like this before, but I'm doing the best I can, considering that if we were in the classroom, we'd have this huge screen and have these great speakers, especially in West Hall 116, where I usually teach this course. So we'll keep going. We'll see how it works out. Now, to continue talking about the history of television, you can't talk about it without talking about what happened in the 1950s. It started to grow, and it was a popularity in a sport called football. Now, baseball had always been popular. Even before radio, baseball was immensely popular. And then, of course, came radio, television. It became a television staple. As a matter of fact, a lot of owners were not even happy about putting baseball on television. They were actually concerned that it would keep people from buying tickets. And we're talking about up until the early 1980s. As a matter of fact, for some of you who are Yankee fans or even Met fans, isn't it amazing that you get every game on TV? Well, that wasn't even the case until 1989. As a matter of fact, for those of you who are baseball historians, you know, the Yankees won back-to-back World Series in 1977, 1978. This is when I was 12 and 13 years old, and I was a huge Yankees fan. Yet, we'd only get about 50 or 60 games out of 162 on TV every year. They just wouldn't put every game on TV. They wanted people, because still, a lot of the marketplace and how they were making their income, a lot of it was still based on ticket sales. And not realizing that once in 1989, when it was the Yankees who made the huge 12-year deal with the MSG network. And after 12 years of making buku bucks through there, that's when the Yankees said, well, why are we going to use your network? We'll just create our own and make our own money, keep our own money. But yeah, they showed that you could show every single game and you would make a huge profit. It was funny how making the money in the old days, you know, there was no merchandise. I mean, you could barely get a shirt or a hat that said New York Yankees on it in the mid-1970s. But yeah, television really revolutionized sports. But it all really started with what they call the greatest game ever played. It was a National Football League game. It was the NFL Championship game at Yankee Stadium between the Baltimore Colts and the New York Giants, back when the Giants used to play their home games there. Now, it wasn't that great a game, but the reason why they call it the greatest game is that at the time, America had a population of about 260 million people, yet they estimate about 75 million people watched this game at home.
It's third down. Will they kick or try once more for the touchdown? They elect to go for the 6 points. El Mamichi dives through a huge hole, and the game is over. The Baltimore Colts win a historic overtime victory, beating the Eastern Conference champion New York Giants 23-17 in a truly magnificent come-from-behind effort.
And of course is the famous end zone shot.
The world champions of football. The Colts clean everything out of the way.
And again, it attracted almost 75 million people watching on television. And that's when they realized that football was, the NFL professional football was really a television game. Which, of course, still, even today, the number one rated, highest rated television show on TV today, and that's through all, whether it's streaming, anything, is the Sunday Night Football game on NBC. So, still very popular. Not as popular as it was, but still very popular. Now, another sport, so to speak, that really became popular at the beginning of the television era and is still very popular today, believe it or not, is this right here.
Well, good evening, everybody. This is Russ Davis speaking to you from ringside at International Amphitheater in Chicago, where tonight the gorgeous one, gorgeous George himself, the old toast to the toast, is meeting Der Hans Schnabel.
This, of course, is from 1950.
Seems like our Jeffries has a new cut.
And it features one of the most well-known professional wrestlers in wrestling history, and that, of course, is Gorgeous George. Now, here's the reason why this worked so well. Is George, up until television, professional wrestling, yes, it was scripted. You knew who was going to win. You knew what moves were going to be done. You worked with that wrestler you were wrestling against in the locker room before you came out. But it was still viewed as an athletic contest. But it was Gorgeous George who realized that this was a television entertainment thing. And what he did is he would come out and he created this persona of the guy that everyone would love to hate. What he basically did is what is still a feature today in professional wrestling, which again, pro wrestling is on TV on all different channels. Network TV, cable TV, streaming. The WWE, the top company, has its own network and pay-per-view subscription service. It is the bad guy versus the good guy, or what they would call the heel versus the baby face, or the face. And Gorgeous George created this heel character knowing that it would translate well into television. So this is from 1950, and yet if you look today, professional wrestling is on probably almost every night. There's a pro wrestling show that is on television somewhere, whether it's on network TV, on cable, or of course if you go to one of the subscription services. It's amazing that it has lasted as long as it has. Since 1948, when television first went on the air. And Gorgeous George is a big reason of creating that good guy versus bad guy type of thing. So he would take his time coming in, primping up his hair. Perfume would have to be sprayed in the ring before he could even step into the ring. So then, of course, when his opponent would throw him and he would go down, the crowd would explode. And that's exactly the reaction he was looking for. Now, what's interesting about these early days of television is that, TV starts in 1948. And as we're going through the 1950s and 60s, pretty much stays the same. The Western is the most popular type of show throughout the 1950s, throughout the 1960s. Sitcoms are good, and sitcoms are very easy. Okay? My Three Sons, or, shows like I Dream of Jeannie, simple, light, nothing really crazy. And really nothing much. The TV variety show, Ed Sullivan is still going strong through the 60s. The Dean Martin show going through strong in the 60s with the TV variety show. But one thing was becoming more and more important, and that was television news coverage. Now, nothing can tell you or show you about how powerful TV news coverage was, at least for the first time you would see it on television, than what happened in 1968. For the first 4 years, from 64 to 68, that we were in Vietnam, our commander-in-chief of our forces in Vietnam, a general by the name of William Westmoreland would tell us that things were okay, things were going smooth, they were going the way we wanted to, we were defeating the communists and everything else. And to a certain degree, he was very true. He was right. But then came the early part of 1968, where the Vietnamese New Year, Tet. And what happened is instead of having this 3-day ceasefire, the North Vietnamese attacked every single American installation that we had. So Americans, and this was at a time when Americans would watch the evening news every night. Because remember, there is no outlet. It's not like with our phones, where if we want news, we get an update on our phones. Okay? If we wanted to know what was going on, we either turned on the CBS Evening News, NBC Nightly News, or ABC World News Tonight. Every night at 7 o'clock, from 7 to 8 o'clock. And CBS itself would get upwards of 40 million people every night. And it was a perfect time. It was after dinner. It was before prime time, from 7 to 8 o'clock. There was no extra. There was no Entertainment Weekly. There was no Wheel of Fortune Jeopardy hour. All right? It was the nightly news, and you watched the network news. And when people started sitting in their living rooms from Seattle to San Antonio, all the way to New Jersey, they are opening up they're turning on their TV sets, and they're seeing this.
Military police got back into the compound of the $2.5 million embassy complex at dawn. Before that, a platoon of Viet Cong were in control. The communist raiders never got into the main Chancery building. A handful of Marines had it locked and kept them out. But the raiders were everywhere else.
By daylight, Tommy Boulevard, where the embassy is located, was a battleground. No one, unless identified, was allowed in the street.
Get back!
An Australian military policeman was standing guard, firing warning shots to keep the street clear. The bodies of 2 American military policemen who died as they tried to assault the compound lay near their jeep across the boulevard. This is where the Viet Cong raiders broke in. They sneaked up and blasted a hole in the reinforced concrete fence surrounding the compound. They had the big embassy wall to protect them.
What in the hell is going on?
But none of the raiders—
Westmoreland's telling us everything's going well in Vietnam. The U.S. Embassy has been attacked. The U.S. Embassy has been breached. What is going on? Are you kidding me? And of course, all of a sudden in our living rooms all across America, it doesn't look like the war's going that well. Now, the thing is up until this point, there were some protests, but they were smaller and milder compared to what would happen after the Tet Offensive. Now, the interesting part is that militarily, the Tet Offensive was an utter failure for the North Vietnamese army. They lost tens of thousands of soldiers. Every single facility they attacked and tried to overtake, they lost. And although it took sometimes 6 weeks or over 2 months to take back, say, the city of Hue or Khe Sanh, we still eventually were able to do that. So they lost everything. As a matter of fact, the Viet Cong, as was just mentioned in this news piece, the Viet Cong was the guerrilla arm of the North Vietnamese army, ceased to exist after the Tet Offensive. It was decimated. Yet, what people were seeing, the U.S. Embassy being overrun, them being able to infiltrate every single facility, it put a very queasy feeling in people's stomachs. And then, a few weeks after the Tet Offensive, Walter Cronkite, who was the anchor of the CBS Evening News, who was voted by Americans as the most trustworthy, honest person in America, ended one of his newscasts by saying this.
For it seems now more certain than ever that the bloody experience of Vietnam is to end in a stalemate. But it is increasingly clear to this reporter that the only rational way out then will be to negotiate, not as victors, but as an honorable people who lived up to their pledge to defend democracy and did the best they could.
That was Walter Cronkite.
So Cronkite comes on and pretty much says the war is unwinnable. We need to get out. Well, now the protests explode. Now what could have had a few hundred or a few thousand was now going to have tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands of people. Okay? And about a year after he does this broadcast, boom, you've got Woodstock, which was about 500,000 people for a music weekend all protesting the war. It was mind-boggling. Of course, it signaled the end of President Johnson's administration. It was only weeks after this broadcast that he went out there and said that I shall not seek or accept your nomination as president. And, President Nixon, when he ran in 1968, was elected because he said, I'm going to get us out of Vietnam, which he did, which he eventually did. Now, one of the other interesting things, probably one of the most crazy things ever done in television history, by 1970, as I said, pretty much television has been the same way for almost 22 years, from 1948 to 1970. As a matter of fact, a lot of the programming was geared towards who we felt, or who the networks felt was the audience. For example, there were a lot of shows in the top 20 in the ratings every week, especially on CBS, which was the number one network, that were geared towards what we would call a rural audience. But by 1970, statistics were becoming very clear that we were now moving towards more an urban audience. As a matter of fact, in 1970, here's the opening theme of one of the top 20 shows that was on CBS.
Come
down the tracks to the junction. Forget about your cares, it is time to relax at the junction. Lots of curves, you bet, and even more when you get to the junction.
Petticoat Junction.
There's a little hotel.
So you've got Petticoat Junction. Another show that CBS had in the top 20 was this one right here. Here's its opening. And this, of course, is Green Acres. Throw in the Beverly Hillbillies. Okay. Throw in Hee Haw, which was a TV variety show that centered around country music and farms and everything else. And then, of course, you had the Western show Bonanza, which by 1970 had been running for 15 years and was still a top 20 show. But CBS executives said, if we don't do this now, we're going to get lost in the future. So in 1970, with the stroke of a pen, CBS canceled 5 of their shows. All 5 were in the top 20 most watched shows every week. And yet all 5 were canceled. It was Green Acres, Petticoat Junction, the Beverly Hillbillies, Hee Haw, and Bonanza. Well, I mean, not Bonanza, Gunsmoke. So all 5 shows that were in the top 20 in 1970 get canceled. Well, Gunsmoke got a reprieve because CBS President William Paley, Gunsmoke was his favorite show. So that stayed and got to stay on for another 5 years. But the other 4 axed. And CBS decided to go in another direction. Decided to go to a more urban theme. So now, instead of having Green Acres or Petticoat Junction out on the farm, you now had a show that centered around 733 Hauser Street in Queens. And a white Christian bigot by the name of Archie Bunker. And he was a lovable bigot because he just never realized how big he really was. And the show was called All in the Family. And it debuted in 1971 and would be the #1 rated television program for the next 5 years. From 1971 to 1976, it would be #1, averaging 40 million viewers every week.
I took him to the McNabb's dentist, Dr. Marshall Herman, and your father said that shaking hands with him was like shaking hands with a wet washcloth, and he wouldn't let no limp wrists inside his mouth. You know what he called that dentist? What, Ma? He called him the Tooth Fairy. So you see, if Michael has a firm handshake, you got nothing to worry about. Oh, Ma, he's here. Do I look all right? You look lovely. Archie, please be nice to this boy. It's very...
Hey, I'm always nice. Don't let the Jake...
I don't know why the TV is doing that, but...
Please, and please the tie. Yeah, Archie, yeah, put the tie.
Actually, that is very annoying, so we're going to stop it right there. Okay, so All in the Family was about Archie Bunker, who was the guy over here with the gray hair. And he's just this lovable bigot, and he has one child who's a daughter. That was Gloria. She ends up marrying a guy who's a total left-wing leftist, totally against the war in Vietnam and everything else. And what they would do is they would actually, the themes of the show would be racism and you know, politics and all kinds of other social issues. They would tackle things like menopause and, unfortunately, sexual assault. And I say unfortunately because it had to be done, but was done. And it was a big jump way away from what CBS had been doing. But again, it's where America was, And it was the number one program for 5 straight years. As a matter of fact, in the living room right behind me, the 2 chairs where Archie and Edith sat and the table are in the Smithsonian Institute in Washington, D.C. Now, as we move through the 70s, something starts to pop up, and I know I got mine in 1977, and that, of course, was cable television. Cable television was huge, okay? And one of the reasons why cable television really took off is in the beginning, I'll never forget, all I got on cable TV was I would get, like some of the Philadelphia stations. But I'm still watching the same reruns that I would watch on New York station. I'm just watching on Philadelphia. So what's the good thing about cable TV? But then, of course, other stations started to develop. Of course, we saw the 1981 MTV, and then, of course, in 1979 ESPN. But one guy in particular really saw cable TV. And that was a guy by the name of Ted Turner. Now, Ted Turner was this rich guy from Atlanta, Georgia, and he owned a television. It was an independent station. It wasn't a network affiliate. It was Channel 17 in Atlanta. And it would just show reruns. It wasn't a network affiliate. My recycling truck's coming. And he wanted to make it bigger. And he saw what cable TV could do. See, unlike what Sarnoff did in 1948 with NBC TV or William S. Paley with CBS, where you have to now build these affiliates all across the country to carry your programming, what he did is he had local cable companies. And he took his WTBS Channel 17, and of course TBS was Turner Broadcasting System. He would then have all these cable systems. You carry my local station, and we'll split the profits. So now he didn't have to do the whole building, coaxing a television station to not go with that network but go with my network. No, he would just have the cable stations pick me up. Just add me to the number of channels that you offer on your cable system. And here's just an example of some of the commercials you would see.
Coming up next on Superstation WTVS, Elvis Presley sings and swings his way through Blue Hawaii. Later at 1:05 Eastern, it's Mystery and Intrigue as an innocent man is sent to prison. Don't miss Convicted. Here on Superstation WTVS.
And of course, they called it the Superstation because it was a local television station that was now seen all across the country. And he made buku bucks. As a matter of fact, one of the things he also owned the Atlanta Braves baseball team. So he would put Braves baseball on TBS, and they used to call themselves this, and they literally became America's team. Because all over America, on a regular basis, you could see Atlanta Braves baseball. Which at the time, ESPN is still in its infancy. They didn't have a contract with Major League Baseball yet. So, it was local, except for like the NBC Game of the Week on Saturday afternoon. Otherwise, you weren't seeing but your own team in your own cities. And here, if you had cable and you had TBS, you could be anywhere in America and you're watching Atlanta Braves baseball. And it made him a buku amount of bucks. So much so, he then created another cable network, exclusively for cable, where it would be 24 hours, 7 days a week, just news, and he simply called it the Cable News Network, or CNN. And CNN went on the air in 1979, thanks to the money Ted Turner was making with TBS. Now, I want to show you one final clip, if I can get to it. For some reason, I can't get to it right now. Hold on here. I'll get to it. All right. All right. So by the 1980s, you probably don't see me. There we go. By the 1980s, television was now more reflecting what America was. Okay? Who we are and what we were doing. And what that meant was a lot more diversity. And not just diversity, but, where Americans really were. For example, in the 1970s, if you were looking for, say, black characters on television, okay, Usually, unfortunately, they were, into some more stereo. I mean, one of the top shows in the mid '70s that featured, an all-black cast was Good Times, and of course, they lived in a ghetto in Chicago, where the father could never keep a job because he was a black man, which was true, but he was uneducated, and, he was a father of 3 children. 2 of them were grown, and yet he was trying to, wash dishes or do whatever it was, doing his very best. And, of course, he suffered from hypertension because he was always constantly, under pressure, frustrated. It was a great show, but that's basically what you saw. And then came the 1980s. And in the 1980s, you saw the debut of this show. Now, unfortunately, this show has been tainted in the last couple of years because of the main character and what this what this guy was doing. Poor victims of his, that's for sure. But, when you turned on the TVs in 1984, this is what you saw.
Cooking is all about you. It's about what you add to that dish.
Okay, first we'll get past the ad. This, of course, is the opening for The Cosby Show. And it debuted in September of 1984 on NBC and became a huge success. But what's more, its significance was the fact that it was reflecting who America was. Okay? Not every black woman was a maid. Okay? Not every black guy was working some menial job. I mean, here, the 2 main characters, the husband and the wife. The husband was a medical doctor, and the wife was a prominent attorney. And yes, that's where people were. Okay? And with other nationalities, we've been trying to do that. I don't think they've succeeded as well as they should have. I think in different ventures, I think that whether it's in music or movies, you'll see more like Hispanic or Asian characters. But on television, this is Cosby, which really showed the way. And you've seen a lot of this, unfortunately, like I said, what Bill Cosby has done since. But he did build an empire, and he built a great empire on the fact that he was showing where America really was and where America was going. And for a long time, it was the top-rated show. Matter of fact, it was probably one of the last really good top-rated shows in the sense of the ratings it got, where it would get 30, 35, upwards of close to 40 million people every week. But then cable's TV was now starting to come into effect. And cable, when they started to get their own original programs, they were now going to start stealing the subscription TV like HBO and Showtime when they started their original programs, especially in 1999 when HBO premiered The Sopranos. There was a season premiere, I think it was season 5, the season premiere of The Sopranos, season 5, on a Sunday night on subscription television where you had to pay to get HBO, had 16 million viewers. It was amazing. And then, of course, those of you who watch Game of Thrones know that before Game of Thrones went off, they went up to 18 million people. And you're just not going to see that anymore. Not in today's landscape. And the landscape is constantly changing with Netflix and Hulu and all the script. And, of course, everything is subscription now. Disney Plus, you see Paramount is coming out soon. Almost anything that you want to get, you can just get a subscription for. You get an app for it. So, all right, well, that's your TV chapter. You've got your quiz. Your quiz is due by Monday night, 8 p.m., and I'll come back to you on Tuesday as we'll soon get ready for your midterm. Yes, it's that time of year, people. All right, we'll catch you soon.